The prophecy of Isaiah is so dense, so long, and uses so many ancient references and imagery that it is easier to read it as just a mass of meaningless words. But the book makes clear and concrete historical connections and claims. Let's explore one of the published attempts to make sense of those connections. Hi, my name is Pete, and in 2024 I'm reading the whole Bible in its original languages, Hebrew, Aramaic and Greek. I'm using a reading plan that I wrote myself, which is available in an ebook I've released for free. Today I read Isaiah chapter 20, which ends a section of prophetic words from chapters 18 to 20 about Egypt and Kush. Back in 1998, Alviero Niccacci published an article in Vitas Testamentum attempting to historically connect these chapters of Isaiah to ancient sources, particularly the description of events in the Piṟankhy stele. On pages 223 to 224, Niccacci discusses different views of the relationship of biblical prophecy to history, and in a postscript on pages 234 to 235, he summarizes a range of options on the historicity of Isaiah 18 to 20. On one end of the spectrum is a scholar such as Schenker, who views Isaiah to have been composed in the 3rd century BC as an eschatological retelling of Israel's story. Going back a little farther, we have Daisler, who believes Isaiah 16 to 25 to have been composed in the period of Alexander the Great, influenced by the existence of older material. That would put its composition in the late 4th century BC. Niccacci talks of the tendency of literary critical scholars to view prophets as purely historians whose prophecies were only descriptions of what had already happened. Scholars who take this view could date the prophecies of Isaiah 18 to 20 at any period from the 8th century BC to after the turn of Babylon in the 6th century BC or later. As for his own view, Niccacci understands biblical prophets to be something a bit more like political commentators, who do describe and comment on recent and ancient history, but who also discern from this history how political events are likely to unfold in the near future. At the other end of this spectrum, Niccacci describes one view of prophets as diviners who predicted the future absolutely, and he says that in his view, they shouldn't be viewed this way. Now, the most radical view that places most or all of the Hebrew Bible as having been written in the Greek period was particularly fresh in the 1990s and is still around today, and it's pretty common to find biblical scholars and ancient historians who consider the Bible to be a completely unreliable historical source. I'm an evangelical. I do believe that divinely inspired supernatural prophecy about the distant future is possible and is recorded in the Hebrew Bible, which is an inspired and so perfectly reliable text. But that view is not common among Old Testament scholars. Niccacci's view is in between these positions. So different biblical scholars read the biblical text from radically different sets of assumptions and worldviews. Despite that, they can still talk to each other and be helpful to each other. Even if one scholar believes that Isaiah chapter 18 to 20 was written in the 8th century and another in the 2nd century, they can both evaluate objective arguments for the text's relationship to the period of history that it purports to describe, and they can both evaluate objective arguments for the argument and purpose of the text. It's possible to strongly disagree with another academic while still gaining from and contributing a lot to them. The book of Isaiah does provide concrete historical references, and Niccacci begins his discussion by surveying the most relevant ones to Isaiah 18 to 20. These are chapter 1 verse 1, the vision of Isaiah the son of Amos which he saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem in the days of Uzziah, Jotham and Hezekiah, kings of Judah. Chapter 6 verse 1, in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting upon a throne. Chapter 7 verse 11, in the days of Ahaz the son of Jotham, son of Uzziah, king of Judah, Rezin the king of Syria, and Pekah the son of Remaliah the king of Israel came up to Jerusalem to wage war against it, but they could not conquer it. Chapter 14 verse 28, in the year that King Ahaz died came this oracle. Chapter 20 verses 1 to 2, in the year that the commander-in-chief, the Tartan, came to Ashdod, when Sargon, king of Assyria, sent him, he fought against it and took it. At that time the Lord spoke through Isaiah the son of Amos, saying. Niccacci sees these statements as coming in historical order, and on this basis dates Isaiah 18 to 20 between the death of Ahaz in 728-727 and the curbing of Ashdod's rebellion by Sargon in 713-712. Let's put this period on a timeline and add in the dates of key events that Niccacci sees as also relevant. Around 735-734, Tiglath-Pileser III took control of Gaza and established a trading centre there, and after a rebellion in Syria and Palestine, in 732 he had to regain control of Palestine. In 720, Sargon II defeated Syrian forces at Karkar, took Gaza, and defeated Egyptian forces at Raphia. Let's unpack Niccacci's dates and put them in historical perspective. Some major world events that happened around this time were that in 727 BC, Babylon became independent of the Assyrian Empire, and in 716 BC is the legendary death of the mythical Romulus, the founder of Rome. The events of Homer's Odyssey are set around this period or a bit later, even though the great Greek poets won't appear for another few hundred years. Babylon, Greece and Rome will become the major superpowers of the future. The superpowers at the time, however, were Kush-Egypt in the west and Assyria in the east. Egypt at this time was under the control of the Kushite Empire in the south. Kush is often translated in modern English as Ethiopia, but actually refers to people living in what is now modern-day Sudan. Egypt and Assyria were vying for power on the eastern coast of the Mediterranean, with Syria, Palestine, Israel and Gaza as the place where they met directly in battle, engaged in a Cold War, trying to get the regional kings to side with them, and later engaged in trade and friendly relations. The Egyptian campaign of Piṟankhy, that Niccacci dates to 728-727, was his conquest of Egypt all the way to the Mediterranean. As a result, the Kushite Empire looked like this, stretching from the Nile Delta in the north to the Kushite heartlands in the south, where Piṟankhy ruled from Napata. The Kushites had a distinct culture from Egypt, but had adopted some aspects of Egyptian religion, most significantly their worship of the god Ammon. So, some of the context of relevance is the complicated relationship that Piṟankhy had to various Egyptian kings and nobles under his rule, as well as his generals. Piṟankhy died in 714 BC, and Niccacci refers to his successor as Shabaka, which was the prevailing view among Egyptologists at the time of his writing. However, today, most scholars refer to Piṟankhy with the name Piye, believe that he was succeeded by Shabitku, and that Shabaka didn't rise to the throne until 705 BC. Over in the Assyrian Empire, Tiglath-Pileser III reigned until his death in 727 BC and was succeeded by his son Shalmaneser V. Shalmaneser V began a military campaign against the northern kingdom of Israel, but was deposed and killed in 722 BC, and succeeded by his brother Sargon II, who in 720 BC took the northern kingdom into exile. Ahaz ruled the kingdom of Judah until his death in 728-727 and was succeeded by his son Hezekiah. Niccacci unpacks his understanding of Isaiah 18-20 in reference to several historical sources. These are the Piṟankhy stela, a stela made sometime around 725 BC, recounting the victories of Piye, the Kushite emperor, over Egypt; the Kala prism fragment D, an inscribed clay prism made sometime after 716 BC, recounting Sargon's campaign against two rulers who had revolted against Assyrian rule; the Rassam prism, an inscribed clay prism from 643 BC describing military campaigns of Ashurbanipal; the inscription of Tarhaka, an inscription from the early 7th century BC that includes references to the relationship between Egypt and Assyria at that time; and reliefs from the great temple of Ammon at Gebel Barkal. Gebel Barkal is a rocky outcrop on the Nile River in Sudan, 400 kilometers north of Khartoum. The Temple of Ammon was built in the 13th century BC and expanded by Piṟankhy after his conquest of Egypt. Isaiah 18 refers to Kush, not directly to Egypt, and Niccacci sees it as dated to before 720 BC. Niccacci interprets Isaiah 18 verse 1 as a direct reference to the Kushite Empire. Land of whirring wings, which is beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. Verse 2 talks about Kush sending messengers via the Nile, which sends ambassadors by the sea in vessels of papyrus on the waters, which Niccacci interprets as being to Assyria. Go, you swift messengers, to a nation tall and smooth, to a people feared near and far, a nation mighty and conquering, whose land the rivers divide. He thinks the message may have been a request by Piṟankhy to establish trade links with Assyria, but that underneath this request he wanted to get intel on Assyria and reassert his presence in Syria-Palestine. Piṟankhy probably sent these messengers before 720 BC, even though Sargon claims friendly messages from Egypt only came after Ashdod's rebellion against Assyria in 713-712. Verse 6 then refers to a raising of a signal and a blowing of a trumpet, which probably is a change in the political situation that verses 4 to 6 suggest will happen very soon. Verse 1 begins with a woe, and then verse 6 describes death. They shall all of them be left to the birds of prey of the mountains and to the beasts of the earth, which is directed at Egypt. Soon there will be fighting, and Kush will suffer. Niccacci sees this as a prediction of the events in 720 BC. Verse 7 then talks about Assyria sending gifts to the Lord of Hosts in Zion, which probably indicates friendly relations between Assyria and Judah. In contrast to Isaiah 18, Isaiah 19 refers to Egypt and not to Cush. Niccacci dates it to after 720 BC and claims the details of the chapter fit the history of Piṟankhy. Verse 1 talks about the Lord riding on a swift cloud, which will, verse 2, cause infighting among the Egyptians. The Piṟankhy stela describes disunited Egyptian rulers in the 20th dynasty, one of whom defected to Cush, which Piṟankhy exploited to conquer Egypt. In verse 3, the Egyptians will resort to divination, and in verse 4, the Lord will give the Egyptians over to a hard master, who is probably Piṟankhy. Given that Assyria had been pushing to Egypt's border, it would make sense that Piṟankhy would want to establish political and military control over Egypt in response to this. Therefore, the one in verse 11 who says, "I am a son of ancient kings," is probably a description of the Egyptian princes appealing to Piṟankhy to keep them in power under his rule. 2 Kings chapter 17 verse 4 describes Hoshea, the last king of Israel, sending messengers to a pharaoh called So, the king of Egypt, who is not found in any of the Egyptian dynastic records. Piṟankhy is most likely to be this individual. It would make sense that Hoshea would send a request for support to Piṟankhy in 726 BC after he had already conquered Egypt. Then in verse 5, the Nile will be dried up, and in verses 6 to 7, the canals built around the Nile will be ruined, and so the vegetation will rot. Verses 11 and 13 ridicule Egyptian wisdom, which they were famous for. Verse 13 explicitly mentions Memphis. In the Piṟankhy stela, the king had encouraged his soldiers to take Memphis, and that as they did so, they would effectively control all of Egypt. Verse 16 says that the Egyptians will be like women, which was a designation of weakness and fear, and contrasted with being a bull. In the Piṟankhy stela, he is described as being a bull routing bulls. Verse 17 describes the Egyptians as in fear of Judah, and this is probably after Sargon had taken Gaza and allowed Judean clans as a vassal of Assyria to settle there, right on Egypt's border. It's a bit like Russia being scared of Ukraine joining NATO. Verse 18 then describes 5 cities in Egypt speaking the language of Judah, which probably refers to these settlements in Gaza. Therefore, verse 19 describes the existence of Judean religion in Egypt, and verse 20, faithful Judeans living in Egypt asking the Lord for help. As a result, verses 21 to 22 describe Egyptians themselves adopting the Judean religion. Verses 23 to 25 at the end of the oracle describe a highway between Egypt and Assyria, with the Egyptians serving the Assyrians, which Niccacci interprets as the result of Sargon's invasion of Gaza in 720 BC. The Kala Plurism may support this interpretation. Sargon opened the sealed Cairo of Egypt and made Egyptians and Assyrians trade together. This new commercial road created huge opportunities for Judah as the economic intermediary of Egypt and Assyria. However, the road excluded Ashdod, Tyre and Sidon, which led to Ashdod leading a rebellion against Assyria. Isaiah chapter 20 refers to Cush and Egypt together, and verse 1 describes the oracle as being given in the context of that rebellion. In the year that the Tartan came to Ashdod, when Sargon king of Assyria sent him, he fought against it and took it. The oracle is Isaiah warning Judah not to turn against Assyria during Ashdod's rebellion in 713-712. Verses 3 to 4 describe Egypt and Cush being taken into exile into Assyria. This did not immediately occur after the Ashdod rebellion, but the Kushite Empire did eventually make a failed assault on Assyria in 702-701 BC. Niccacci claims that other passages in Isaiah, Hosea and Micah talk about this period of time and make reference to exiles to countries around Palestine, separate to the Assyrian and Babylonian exiles. He cites other passages in the Hebrew Bible that may talk about the prosperity of Judah during the period of positive trade relations between Egypt and Assyria. He also gives examples of Egyptian words, phrases and expressions within the 3 chapters. Niccacci's argument is that the oracles of Isaiah 18, 19 and 20 reflect the impact of Piṟankhy's conquest of Egypt in 728 BC and the subsequent impact of his rule had on relationships with Assyria and the smaller nations within Palestine affected by these 2 superpowers. Historical reconstructions like this always have some degree of uncertainty, and many readers will struggle with Niccacci's presuppositions, either because he treats Isaiah as too reliable an historical source, or because he does not treat Isaiah's oracles as exclusively supernatural revelation. But even where an argument like Niccacci's may not get all the details right, work like this that attempts to line up the details of the prophets with other witnesses from ancient history is extremely helpful. It shows the reader that prophetic words are not just pointless flowery language. They are rooted in some sort of lived reality for ordinary people in the ancient world. The words of the prophets are not just words that exist in a vacuum. They're words spoken into a world of real people. So if you want to read more of those words with me in 2024 in the original languages, then details on my Bible reading plan and EPUB reader, which is free to download and use, can be found in the description below. And if you liked the video, please like the video. And if you want to get video updates of my whole Bible read through in the original languages in 2024, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Thanks for watching.